The encounter. The desert stretched endlessly under the starry night sky. A cold wind swept through the sand, rustling the sparse bushes and carrying an eerie silence. Ethan Harper, a young scientist with messy brown hair and a constant sense of curiosity, stood outside the small observatory where he worked. He adjusted his telescope, gazing up at the heavens, searching for signs of anything unusual. Ethan's nights were usually uneventful, just him, the stars, and his notes. But tonight felt different. Something tugged at his senses, like an invisible thread pulling him toward the unknown. His fingers tapped nervously on the telescope's edge as he double-checked his readings. Suddenly, a bright flash of light streaked across the sky. It wasn't a shooting star. It was too fast, too controlled. What was that? Ethan muttered to himself, his heart pounding. The light descended rapidly, heading toward the desert beyond the hills. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his flashlight, his backpack, and his notebook. Ignoring the warnings from his colleagues about wandering into the desert alone, he hopped into his old Jeep and sped off toward the mysterious glow. As he drove closer, the light grew brighter, casting an otherworldly glow over the sand. Ethan parked the Jeep and continued on foot, the crunch of sand beneath his boots the only sound. His flashlight beam danced across the landscape until it landed on something that made him freeze. There, in the middle of the desert, was a spacecraft unlike anything he had ever seen. It was sleek and silver, with faint blue lights pulsing along its edges. The ship hummed softly, as if alive, and the air around it crackled with energy. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment every scientist dreamed of, but never truly believed would happen. As he stepped closer, the ship's door opened with a quiet hiss. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the glowing interior. Ethan's grip on his flashlight tightened as the figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a woman. At least, she appeared to be. Her features were human-like, but with subtle differences. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light like a pair of small moons. Her skin shimmered with a translucent quality, and her hair flowed as if it were made of liquid silver. She was dressed in a sleek, metallic suit that clung to her slender frame. Despite her alien appearance, there was an air of confidence and amusement about her. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice trembling. The woman tilted her head, studying him with an expression that was both curious and amused. Then she smiled, a smile that was almost human but carried an edge of something far more advanced. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "And you must be one of the Earth creatures I've heard about." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Earth creatures? You mean humans?" Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes, humans. Such an amusing species, always so eager to prove themselves in a universe that barely notices them." Ethan felt a mix of awe and indignation. "Amusing? We've sent probes into space, built telescopes to explore the stars, and made incredible discoveries. We're not just some joke." Lyra chuckled, a sound that was both light and condescending. "Oh, I didn't mean to offend you, little human. Your kind's efforts are endearing. But love, now that is the true comedy." Ethan frowned. "Love? What do you mean?" Lyra stepped closer, her translucent skin catching the moonlight. "My species observes the universe in ways you cannot imagine. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, stars be born and die, and countless worlds drift into the void. Yet, among all these wonders, humans cling to this peculiar emotion you call love. It's illogical, chaotic, and ultimately meaningless." Ethan's cheeks flushed with anger. "Love isn't meaningless. It's what drives us to care for each other, to create, to sacrifice. It's what makes life worth living." Lyra raised an elegant eyebrow, her smile growing wider. "How quaint. A primitive species defending its primitive feelings. Very well, human. Convince me." Ethan stared at her, confused. Convince you? Yes, Lyra said, crossing her arms. Show me why love is so important to your species. Prove to me that it's more than just an evolutionary flaw. If you succeed, I'll admit I was wrong. But if you fail, she paused, her glowing eyes narrowing. Well, let's just say your species' obsession with love will become a universal punchline. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just a challenge, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to show an advanced alien being the beauty and depth of humanity. All right, he said, meeting her glowing gaze. Challenge accepted. Lyra's smile widened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of curiosity, maybe even excitement, in her eyes. She extended a hand, her fingers shimmering like starlight. Then let the experiment begin. As their hands met, Ethan felt a strange warmth pass between them, like the spark of something far greater than either of them could understand. The night around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the universe itself was watching. The encounter that started with a joke was about to become a story that would change the fate of both humanity and the stars forever. Lyra's research. Lyra stood on the edge of a bustling park in the middle of the city, her glowing eyes scanning the scene before her. Humans were everywhere, laughing, arguing, playing, and most importantly, connecting. Children ran after colorful kites, couples held hands on benches, and friends shared stories over steaming cups of coffee. To Lyra, it was a chaotic symphony of emotions, one she was determined to decode. Ethan stood beside her, his arms crossed as he watched her take it all in. This is where you'll find your answers, he said, gesturing toward the crowd. Lyra raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Answers. All I see is noise. Ethan smirked. Then start listening. For the first few days, Lyra approached her mission with clinical precision. She carried a small device that resembled a glowing orb, which she used to record interactions and scan emotional energy fields. Her first stop was a nearby coffee shop, where she observed people talking in hushed tones or laughing loudly over shared jokes. What are they doing? She asked Ethan, tilting her head. They're connecting, Ethan explained. Friends catching up, strangers bonding over shared interests. Lyra narrowed her eyes, focusing on a young couple seated by the window. The woman reached across the table to hold the man's hand, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. Lyra activated her orb, analyzing the energy between them. They are exchanging high levels of emotional energy, she said, puzzled. Why? Because they care about each other, Ethan replied. That's love. Lyra snorted. Love? It looks inefficient. Why waste time on such frivolous displays when they could be focusing on survival? Ethan sighed. It's not about survival. It's about connection. You can't measure love like you measure energy or matter. It's deeper than that. Lyra frowned but didn't argue. She continued her observations, moving from the coffee shop to other locations, a hospital, a school, and even a local shelter. Each setting presented new facets of human relationships, from the quiet resilience of a single mother comforting her child to the camaraderie of volunteers helping strangers. At the hospital, Lyra witnessed something that made her pause. A man sat beside a hospital bed, holding the frail hand of an elderly woman. He spoke softly, his voice thick with emotion. Who is she to him? Lyra asked Ethan. His wife, Ethan said. She's sick, but he's here every day, staying by her side. That's love. Lyra studied the scene, her orb glowing faintly as it captured the interaction. His energy levels are low. He's clearly exhausted, yet he remains. Why? Because love isn't just about joy or happiness, Ethan said. It's about sacrifice and commitment. It's about being there, even when it's hard. For the first time, Lyra didn't have a quick retort. She watched the man for a long moment before turning away, her expression unreadable. One evening, Ethan invited Lyra to a community event, a wedding. It was a small, intimate affair held in a backyard adorned with twinkling lights and flowers. Lyra observed quietly as the bride and groom exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion. "What's happening now?" she asked Ethan. "They're promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives," he explained. Lyra's brows furrowed. "But how can they guarantee that? Emotions are unpredictable. What if their love fades?" "That's the risk," Ethan admitted. "But they're willing to take it because love is worth the risk." The ceremony concluded with cheers and applause, and the couple shared their first dance. Lyra felt an unfamiliar sensation as she watched them, a faint stirring in her chest, like the echo of something she couldn't quite name. Not all of Lyra's observations were heartwarming. She witnessed arguments, betrayals, and heartbreaks. At one point, she stumbled upon a young man sitting alone in the rain, tears streaming down his face as he clutched a letter. Lyra approached him, her curiosity piqued. "Why are you emitting such intense sadness?" she asked bluntly. The man looked up, startled, but something about Lyra's otherworldly presence made him answer, "I loved someone, but they didn't feel the same way." Lyra tilted her head. "And yet you continue to feel this pain." "Yes," he said, his voice breaking, "because love isn't something you can just turn off." Lyra remained silent, her glowing eyes reflecting the rain-soaked streets. For the first time, she began to grasp the complexity of human emotions, the highs and lows, the joy and pain, all intertwined in an intricate dance. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra's perspective began to shift. Her initial amusement at humanity's obsession with love was replaced by a grudging respect. She still found it illogical, but she couldn't deny its power. Love, it seemed, was more than just an emotion. It was a force that shaped lives, inspired sacrifices, and created bonds stronger than any she had ever seen. But the real challenge was yet to come. Lyra's people, monitoring her progress from afar, sent her a message, a reminder of her mission and a warning not to let her observations cloud her judgment. Ethan noticed her growing unease. "What's wrong?" he asked one evening as they walked through the park. Lyra hesitated before replying. "I've seen much, but I still don't understand. Love is beautiful, yes, but it's also painful and irrational. How can your species embrace something so unpredictable?" "Because that's what makes it real," Ethan said. "Love isn't perfect. It's messy and complicated, but it's also what makes us human." Lyra didn't respond, but for the first time, she began to wonder if there was more to love than she had ever imagined. Her research was far from over, but one thing was certain. The more she learned about humanity, the more she questioned everything she thought she knew. And the deeper she delved into the mystery of love, the more she realized that it might not be a weakness after all. The challenge. Lyra sat on the edge of a rooftop overlooking the city, the faint hum of her alien ord resting beside her. Below, the human world buzzed with activity. Cars honked, neon signs flickered, and people hurried through the streets, wrapped in their own stories. The chaos of Earth was starting to feel strangely familiar, even comforting. But tonight, something felt different. Ethan climbed up the last rung of the fire escape, panting slightly. "You could have picked a cafe for this conversation, you know," he said, pulling himself onto the roof. Lyra didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on a young couple arguing on the street below. Their raised voices carried fragments of anger and heartbreak, yet neither of them walked away. "They're fighting," Lyra observed, her voice unusually quiet. "Yeah," Ethan said, brushing the dust off his jacket. "Relationships aren't always smooth. Sometimes love gets messy." Lyra finally turned to him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Messy? That's an understatement. Love is chaos wrapped in delusion. Why do you humans continue to subject yourselves to it?" Ethan leaned against the ledge, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Because it's worth it. The good outweighs the bad." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "Prove it," she said, her voice suddenly sharper. Ethan blinked. "What?" "Prove it to me," Lyra repeated. If you truly believe love is the foundation of your species, then show me why it matters. Convince me that it's more than just a chemical response or an evolutionary glitch. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You want me to prove love? Lyra nodded. Yes, consider it a challenge. Ethan crossed his arms, his curiosity piqued. And what happens if I convince you? Lyra smirked. Then I will admit that love has value. But if you fail, she paused, her expression turning serious. I will return to my people with undeniable evidence that your species is as flawed as I suspected. Love will become the greatest joke in the universe. Ethan stared at her, weighing her words. This wasn't just a debate, it was a test, one with stakes far greater than his own pride. He thought about humanity, about the people who had fought, sacrificed, and endured because of love. Could he really encapsulate all of that in a way Lyra would understand? Challenge accepted, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. The first step of Ethan's plan was to take Lyra to a place where love wasn't just spoken about but lived. He brought her to a hospice, a quiet building filled with soft lighting and the scent of flowers. It was a place of endings, but also of profound connections. Ethan guided Lyra to a small room where an elderly man sat by the bedside of his wife. Her frail body rested against a mountain of pillows, her eyes closed in peaceful slumber. The man held her hand, his own trembling slightly, but his expression was one of calm devotion. They'd been married for 60 years, Ethan whispered. She's in her final days, but he's here every moment, just to be with her. Lyra scanned the room with her orb, capturing the man's emotional energy. He's exhausted, she noted. His health is deteriorating. Why doesn't he leave to take care of himself? Because he loves her, Ethan said simply. She's been his partner, his friend, his everything. Being here for her now isn't a burden. It's his way of honoring all they've shared. Lyra's glowing eyes lingered on the man's face, her usual skepticism momentarily absent. He's sacrificing his own well-being for hers, she said softly, more to herself than to Ethan. Ethan nodded. That's love. It's not just about what you gain. It's about what you're willing to give. Next, Ethan brought Lyra to a bustling elementary school. Children ran across the playground, their laughter echoing through the air. A young teacher knelt beside a little boy who had scraped his knee, her voice soothing as she applied a bandage. Parents and teachers pour their hearts into raising these kids, Ethan explained. They sacrifice their time, energy, and sometimes even their dreams to give them a better future. Lyra watched as the teacher patted the boy's shoulder, her smile warm and reassuring. This is nurturing, Lyra said. But it's not efficient. They could achieve more by focusing on themselves. Ethan shook his head. Maybe. But love isn't about efficiency. It's about building something greater than yourself, like a family, a community, or even a legacy. The final stop was unexpected. Ethan took Lyra to a war memorial, a quiet place filled with stone plaques engraved with names. Flowers and photographs lined the base of the memorial, left by loved ones honoring those who had served. These people fought and died for their families, their friends, and their beliefs, Ethan said. They gave everything because they loved their homes and the people in them. Lyra stood in silence, her orb glowing faintly as it absorbed the solemn energy of the place. This is love too, she asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Yes, Ethan said. Love isn't just about joy or happiness. It's about courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that make life meaningful. As they walked back through the city, Lyra's usual confidence seemed to waver. Your examples are compelling, she admitted. But love is still unpredictable. It causes pain as much as it brings joy. How can you justify such a volatile emotion? Ethan stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. Because it's real. Love isn't perfect, but it's what makes us human. It's what drives us to connect, to create, and to endure. And sometimes, it's the only thing that gives life meaning. Lyra didn't reply. For the first time, She felt the weight of Ethan's words pressing against the edges of her understanding. The challenge she had issued was turning out to be far more complex than she had anticipated. As the night deepened, Lyra gazed up at the stars, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Somewhere in the chaos of human emotions, she sensed a truth she wasn't ready to face. The experiment wasn't over, but Lyra knew it was no longer just about proving a point. It was about discovering something she had never experienced before. A love born in conflict. Lyra paced back and forth in the small apartment Ethan called home. The faint hum of her alien ore, resting on a nearby table, filled the air as she reviewed the data she had collected over weeks of observing humanity. The graphs and holographic projections displayed a dizzying array of emotional fluctuations, spikes of joy, valleys of despair, and an unpredictable chaos that made her feel strangely uneasy. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping his coffee as he watched her. "You've been staring at that thing for hours," he said. "Find any answers yet?" Lyra didn't look up. "The patterns are inconsistent. Your species defies logic at every turn." She turned to face him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "How can you justify love when it leads to so much conflict? Every example you've shown me includes pain, misunderstanding, or sacrifice. This isn't strength, it's weakness." Ethan smirked, setting his mug down. "Love isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about surviving it. The strongest connections aren't the ones without challenges. They're the ones that grow despite them." Lyra tilted her head, skeptical. "Show me," she said. The next day, Ethan brought Lyra to a small community center. Inside, a group of volunteers was busy organizing supplies for families affected by a recent disaster. The room buzzed with activity as people worked together, their faces lined with exhaustion but lit with determination. Lyra's orb pulsed faintly as she scanned the scene. These people, they've lost their homes, their stability. Yet, they remain here, helping others. Why? Ethan gestured toward a middle-aged woman sorting canned goods. "That's Maria. She lost everything, her house, her possessions, but she's here every day, helping others rebuild their lives. It's not about what she's lost, it's about what she can give." Lyra frowned, her orb displaying a complex web of emotional energy around Maria. This level of altruism is inefficient. She should be focusing on her own recovery. "It's not about efficiency," Ethan said. "It's about love. Love for her community, for the people she cares about. That's what drives her." Later, Ethan took Lyra to a local park where a public art installation was being unveiled. The centerpiece was a towering sculpture, its intricate design telling the story of a couple who had endured years of separation during a war but found their way back to each other. The artist, an elderly man with trembling hands, stood before the crowd, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke. "This sculpture is dedicated to my wife, who taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. No matter the distance, the hardships, or the pain, love is what brought us back together." Lyra watched silently, her orb glowing softly as it captured the emotional energy radiating from the crowd. She turned to Ethan, her expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. This man's love endured conflict, loss, and separation. And yet, he sees it as a triumph. Why? "Because love isn't about avoiding pain," Ethan said. "It's about finding meaning in it. It's what keeps people going, even when everything else seems lost." Lyra didn't respond, but her glowing eyes betrayed a flicker of something she didn't fully understand. Admiration, perhaps, or curiosity. That evening, as they walked through the city, a commotion drew their attention. A man stood on a street corner, holding a battered guitar and singing a heartfelt ballad. His voice was raw, filled with emotion that cut through the noise of the city. A small crowd had gathered, some swaying to the music, others wiping away tears. Lyra tilted her head. Why do they respond so strongly to this? Ethan smiled. Music has a way of expressing emotions that words can't. That man's song isn't just about love. It's a story of loss, hope, and resilience. It's something everyone here can relate to. Lyra watched the man, her orb pulsating faintly. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It was as if the melody carried a piece of the human soul, raw and unfiltered. As the days passed, Lyra found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. Her observations had shown her the depths of human connection, but they had also revealed the pain and sacrifice that came with it. She began to question her own beliefs, the teachings of her people that had dismissed love as a weakness. One night, as she sat alone on the rooftop of Ethan's apartment, staring at the stars, she felt a strange ache in her chest. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, and yet it felt important. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her and sat down, glancing at her orb, which lay dormant beside her. "You've been quiet lately," he said. Lyra hesitated before speaking. "Your species, you endure so much pain for love, and yet you cling to it, even when it hurts. Why?" Ethan took a sip of his tea, his gaze thoughtful. "Because love gives us something to fight for. It's what makes life worth living. Without it, we're just surviving. With it, we're truly alive." Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the stars, the weight of his words settling over her. For the first time, she wondered if her people had been wrong, if perhaps, in their pursuit of logic and efficiency, they had lost something far more valuable. The challenge she had issued to Ethan was no longer about proving a point. It was becoming a journey of self-discovery, one that would test not only her understanding of humanity, but also her own beliefs. And as the night deepened, Lyra realized that the conflict she had once dismissed as weakness might just be the greatest strength of all. The revelation. Lyra stood in the quiet of the observatory's rooftop, her gaze fixed on the stars above. She often retreated here at night, away from the chaotic human world that had begun to unravel her carefully constructed beliefs. The hum of the orb in her hand, a device used to analyze human emotions, was now a source of discomfort. The data it collected painted a picture that conflicted with everything her species had taught her. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to her, though she rarely touched human food or drink. "You've been quiet," he said, leaning against the railing. "I've been thinking," Lyra replied, her voice unusually subdued. "This thing you call love, it's more than I anticipated. I came here to prove its insignificance, but the more I observe, the more I question." Ethan took a sip of his tea, the warmth soothing in the cool night air. "That's a good thing, isn't it? Questioning leads to understanding." Lyra shook her head, her glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Not in my world. In my world, questioning leads to exile." Ethan set his mug down, sensing the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated, her fingers tightening around the orb. "My species once valued emotions, love, compassion, joy. But we evolved beyond them. We believed they were weaknesses that hindered our progress. Over time, we stripped them from our lives, replacing them with logic and efficiency." She paused, her gaze distant. "But now I wonder if we lost something greater in the process." Ethan's brows furrowed. "You don't seem like someone who's completely detached from emotions. You've shown curiosity, amusement, even frustration." Lyra gave a bitter smile. "Those are remnants, echoes of what we used to be. My people suppress emotions through technology and conditioning. I was sent here because I'm considered an outlier. Too curious, too human." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy, but kept his voice steady. "Maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's a strength." Lyra turned to face him, her expression conflicted. "Strength. Do you know what my people will do if I return with the data I've gathered? They'll erase it. They'll erase me. Admitting that love has value would mean admitting that we've been wrong for millennia. My species doesn't tolerate being wrong." The next day, Lyra received a transmission from her ship. The holographic message hovered in the air, displaying the stern face of one of her superiors. "Lyra, the figure said, its voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You have exceeded the allotted time for this mission. Return immediately with your findings. Failure to comply will result in permanent exile." The message disappeared, leaving Lyra standing alone in the observatory. The ultimatum hung heavy in the air. Ethan found her moments later, her usual composure replaced by a rare vulnerability. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "They've given me an order," Lyra said, her voice hollow. "I must return or face exile." Ethan's heart sank. "What are you going to do?" Lyra stared at the orb in her hands, its glow dimmer than usual. "I don't know. If I leave, I lose everything I've seen here. But if I stay, I lose my people. Either way I lose." Ethan stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not just an observer anymore, Lyra. You're part of this now. You've seen what love can do, the good and the bad. You've felt it, even if you don't want to admit it." Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes shimmering with an emotion she couldn't name. "And if I stay, what then? What can love possibly offer me that my people cannot?" "Freedom," Ethan said simply. "The freedom to feel, to connect, to be more than just a piece of a machine. Isn't that worth fighting for?" That night, Lyra made her decision. She stood before her ship, its sleek surface glowing faintly in the moonlight. The orb in her hand pulsed with energy, containing all the data she had collected about humanity. Ethan watched from a distance, his chest tight with apprehension. "Whatever you decide," he called out, "just know that you've already changed more than you realize." Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Humans have a saying, don't they? Something about love being worth the risk." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it is." With a deep breath, Lyra raised the orb and crushed it in her hand. The device shattered, its glow dissipating into the night. Her ship's lights dimmed, signaling her severance from her people. Ethan's eyes widened. "You're staying." Lyra walked toward him, her steps deliberate. "I'm staying," she said, her voice steady. "Not because I believe in love yet, but because I want to. I need to understand it, not as an observer, but as a part of it." Ethan smiled, relief and admiration washing over him. "You won't regret this." Lyra allowed herself a small, uncertain smile. "I hope you're right, Ethan. For both our sakes." As the ship powered down for the last time, Lyra looked up at the stars, wondering if her people were watching. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her existence, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. And hope, she realized, was a beginning. The sacrifice. The desert was quiet again, just as it had been on the night Lyra first arrived. Her ship, once a gleaming beacon of alien technology, now stood lifeless, its lights dimmed, and its power source drained. Lyra sat cross-legged in the sand, staring at the horizon as the first rays of dawn crept over the dunes. She had severed her connection to her people, crushed her data orb, and chosen to stay on Earth. But the weight of that decision was starting to settle on her shoulders. Ethan approached her cautiously, his boots crunching on the sand. He had stayed nearby all night, unwilling to leave her alone after such a monumental choice. In his hands was a thermos of coffee and a small blanket, which he offered silently. Lyra glanced at him, her glowing eyes dimmer than usual. "I don't require warmth," she said flatly. "I know," Ethan replied, draping the blanket over her shoulders anyway. "But it's not about need. It's about comfort." Lyra said nothing, but she didn't shrug it off. She returned her gaze to the horizon, her mind racing. "Do you think they're watching?" Ethan hesitated. "Your people? Maybe. But I don't think they'll interfere. They're probably trying to figure out what to do next." Lyra's fingers dug into the sand. "They'll see me as a traitor, an anomaly that needs to be forgotten." Ethan crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "You're more than that, Lyra. You made a choice, a brave one. That's not something to be ashamed of." The days that followed were a strange mix of adjustment and uncertainty. Lyra accompanied Ethan as he returned to his daily life, though she remained distant and watchful. She observed the mundane routines of human existence: grocery shopping, casual conversations, and quiet evenings spent reading or watching the stars. But even as she tried to assimilate, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Her connection to her people, her identity, and her purpose had been severed, leaving a void she didn't know how to fill. One evening, as they sat on the roof of Ethan's small apartment, Lyra broke the silence. "Do you ever regret loving someone?" Ethan set down the book he'd been reading and looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes. Love can hurt. It can leave scars. But even with the pain, it's worth it. The memories, the moments, it's what makes us who we are." Lyra frowned, her glowing eyes flickering. "I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I was a scientist, an observer, but now, I'm nothing." "You're not nothing," Ethan said firmly. "You're someone who had the courage to question everything you were taught. That takes strength." Lyra's gaze softened, but her doubt remained. "I don't feel strong. I feel lost." One night, everything changed. Lyra and Ethan were walking through the city when a news report flashed across a giant screen in the town square. The anchor spoke urgently about a humanitarian crisis. An earthquake had struck a nearby region, leaving thousands homeless and injured. Relief efforts were underway, but resources were stretched thin. Ethan turned to Lyra, his expression serious. "We have to help." Lyra hesitated. "How? I've severed my connection to my technology. I have nothing to offer." "You have more than you think," Ethan said. The two of them joined a volunteer convoy heading to the disaster zone. The scene that greeted them was chaotic: collapsed buildings, injured people, and families huddled together under makeshift shelters. Lyra felt a pang of something unfamiliar as she took it all in. It wasn't just curiosity or pity. It was something deeper. Ethan immediately jumped into action, helping organize supplies and assist the injured. Lyra watched him, unsure of where to start. Then a child approached her, clutching a tattered blanket. "Are you an angel?" the boy asked, his wide eyes reflecting her faint glow. Lyra blinked, caught off guard. "No, I'm not." The boy tilted his head. "But you look like one." Without thinking, Lyra knelt down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm here to help," she said softly. From that moment, Lyra threw herself into the relief efforts. She used her knowledge of biology and medicine to assist injured survivors, improvising solutions with the limited resources available. Her otherworldly glow and calm demeanor earned her the trust of the frightened children, who clung to her as a source of comfort. For the first time, Lyra felt like she was part of something greater than herself. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra and Ethan became integral to the relief efforts. Lyra's abilities and quick thinking saved lives, while Ethan's empathy and determination inspired others to keep going. One evening, as they sat by a fire with the other volunteers, Lyra turned to Ethan. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "Understand what?" he asked. "Love," Lyra replied. "It's not just an emotion. It's a force, a connection that drives people to care, to sacrifice, to endure. It's messy and illogical, but it's also beautiful." Ethan smiled, the flickering firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Took you long enough." Lyra chuckled, a rare sound that seemed to surprise even herself. "I still don't know what my future holds, but I think I made the right choice." Ethan reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did, Lyra. You really did." For the first time in her existence, Lyra felt at peace. She had sacrificed everything she once knew, but in return, she had gained something far greater, a place where she truly belonged. Humanity's greatest love story. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Lyra stood on the observatory's rooftop, the faint hum of distant activity below her. The world was settling into a new rhythm, one she had begun to embrace. Her once pristine metallic suit now bore signs of wear, a testament to her time spent among humans. She glanced down at the notebook in her hands, its pages filled with sketches, notes, and reflections, a record of her journey from skeptic to believer. Ethan joined her, carrying a stack of papers and a laptop. "Ready to finish this?" he asked, setting the items on a small table. Lyra gave a slight nod. "It's strange. My species once considered emotions to be weaknesses, and yet I found strength in them. This love you speak of, it's more powerful than I ever imagined." Ethan smiled. "And now it's time to share that discovery with the world." The book. Over the past few months, Lyra and Ethan had been working on a project, a book chronicling her journey, her observations, and the lessons she had learned. The title, Beyond Logic, The Alien's Journey into the Heart of Humanity, was Ethan's idea, though Lyra had grown fond of it. The book was more than a collection of stories. It was a message to humanity. Lyra wanted to show people that their greatest strength wasn't in their technology, their intelligence, or even their survival instincts. It was in their capacity to connect, to care, and to love. A final test. As the book neared completion, a new challenge emerged. Late one night, Lyra received a faint signal from her people. It was weak and fragmented, but the message was clear. "Lyra, you have defied our orders and betrayed your mission. Return to us immediately, or face permanent severance from our collective consciousness." Lyra stared at the message, her mind racing. Though she had already severed her physical ties to her people, the idea of being completely cut off, a forgotten anomaly, made her chest tighten. Ethan found her sitting in the dark, the faint glow of the holographic message illuminating her face. "What's going on?" he asked, concern in his voice. "They've issued their final ultimatum," Lyra said quietly. "If I don't return, they'll erase me from their collective memory. It will be as if I never existed." Ethan knelt beside her. "And if you go back?" "I'll lose everything I've gained here," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything I've come to understand." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you already know what you need to do." A message to the stars. Lyra made her decision the next morning. She and Ethan set up a transmitter at the observatory, pointing it toward the stars. With Ethan's help, she crafted a message, not just to her people, but to any civilization that might be listening. The message was simple yet profound. "I am Lyra, a being from beyond your world. I came to Earth to observe, to study, and to prove that humanity's greatest strength, their capacity for love, was a weakness. I was wrong. Love is not a flaw. It is not an imperfection. It is the force that binds us, that pushes us to create, to sacrifice, and to endure. It is the essence of life itself. To my people, if you hear this, know that I am not returning. I choose to stay here, among the humans, to learn from them, and to live in a way I never thought possible. And to any who hear this message, may you find the courage to embrace love in all its chaos and beauty. It is not logic that defines us. It is connection." As the transmission ended, Lyra felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spoken her truth, and though she didn't know if her people would listen, she knew she had done the right thing. Humanity's response. The book was released a month later. It became an instant phenomenon, sparking conversations across the globe. People were captivated by Lyra's story, an alien being who had come to Earth as a skeptic and left as a believer in the power of love. Some doubted its authenticity, calling it an elaborate work of fiction. But others saw it for what it truly was, a reflection of humanity's deepest truths. Letters poured in from readers, thanking Lyra for reminding them of what truly mattered. Couples reconciled, friendships were mended, and strangers found new reasons to connect. The book became a symbol of hope in a world often divided by fear and conflict. The alien who stayed. Lyra's decision to remain on Earth wasn't without challenges. She faced skepticism, isolation, and the occasional reminder of how different she was. But she also found joy in the simplest moments, sharing a meal with friends, laughing at Ethan's terrible jokes, and watching children play in the park. Over time, Lyra became a part of the very world she had once studied from a distance. She volunteered at shelters, worked with scientists to solve global challenges, and even became a mentor to children curious about the stars. One evening, as she and Ethan walked through the park, a little girl ran up to them. She tugged on Lyra's sleeve, her wide eyes filled with wonder. "Are you the alien from the book?" the girl asked. Lyra knelt down, her glowing eyes meeting the child's. "Yes, I am." The girl smiled. "My mom said your story made her cry. She said it reminded her of how much she loves us." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she was still learning to name. "Then your mom is very wise," she said softly. As the girl ran back to her family, Ethan turned to Lyra with a grin. "See, you're making a difference." Lyra nodded, her heart full. "Not just me," she said. "We all are." A legacy among the stars. Lyra's story didn't end there. Her message to the stars continued to travel through the galaxy, reaching worlds she would never see. Somewhere, on a distant planet, a being not so different from her might hear her words and wonder, could love exist for them too? And on Earth, her legacy lived on, not as a visitor from another world, but as a reminder that humanity's greatest strength lay in their ability to love, to hope, and to believe in something greater than themselves. Lyra had found her place, not among the stars, but in the hearts of those she had come to understand and cherish. And that, she realized, was the greatest story of all.